So you're not going to believe this. Do you remember the UHT from last year?
Okay, take it easy, man. I don't know if you're supposed to share those kind of private details on a show like this.
No, you're thinking UTI. I'm talking about the UHT, the underused housing tax.
Right. Of course. The tax on vacant homes introduced in 2022, a 1% annual tax on vacant or underused residential properties owned by foreign nationals to increase housing availability.
Yeah,
Much different than a UTI.
yeah, not a UTI at all. So according to the Globe and Mail, the CRA, the Canada Revenue Agency, has waived nearly 2.5 billion in interest and penalties related to Ottawa's tax on vacant and underused homes held by foreign owners, a figure that dwarfs the amount of revenue that it was even going to make. So the amount of money that it was going to raise, the penalties and interest is like way. We're going to get to the numbers, but way bigger than the revenue of the new levy.
Yeah, we're going to talk all about that today, as well as whether or not foreign investment is even an issue in Canada.
We're going to talk about how, despite the foreign buyer ban, foreigners can still actually buy real estate in Canada. So, if you are a foreigner looking to buy real estate in Canada, we're going to give you the how-to on that.
What are the top countries with foreign investment here in Canadian real estate? And maybe we'll round off with what are the top foreign countries that Canadians are investing in. So we'll look at who's investing in Canada and where Canadians are investing abroad.
And I guess we'll start off with the UHT then. By the sounds of it, nobody really complied with the tax, or like the filing was confusing. I remember we were talking about this because they bounced it around so many times. We predicted this earlier on the show. A lot of these foreign investors would basically see these non-filing penalties as a privacy tax, and now they don't even have to pay that privacy tax.
Yeah, the UHT, which is the underused housing tax, again introduced in 2022, proposed a 1% annual tax on vacant or underused residential properties that are owned by foreign nationals, and that was to increase housing availability.
However, the complex reporting requirements were a bit of an entanglement for many Canadians, which prompted the CRA to repeatedly grant relief to late filers and also change the filing date a couple of times. In response, they largely eliminated filing requirements for Canadian homeowners and corporations beginning the 2023 tax year, which we reported on the show.
Now, the Globe and Mail found that according to the public accounts, which include the federal government's audited financial statements, the CRA waived nearly $2.5 billion in interest charges and penalties for 2022 alone.
So back when we talked about the UHT for the first time, they had estimated that they would raise about 49 million dollars that they would have collected. So basically, they waived 2.5 billion in interest charges and penalties, and there was only 49 million in revenue that was supposed to be collected from this program during the 2023-2024 fiscal tax year.
Math doesn't seem to be mathing, but the Globe and Mail got a comment from a guy named John O'Kay. Am I saying that right? John O'Kay? That's
Looks like Okie to me, but
Okie. That's a cool name. Vice President of Taxation at the Chartered Professional Accountants of Canada. So probably better at math than we are, Dan. He felt that the high amount of waived penalties indicates widespread confusion and administrative challenges when the tax was first introduced.
this suggests that the tax affected many Canadians. I know you and I filed, like, we had to do a lot of this for corps when kind of scrambling for the dates to say that they were, like, to stipulate kind of the status on all of these investment properties. So it affected a lot of Canadians, not just foreign nationals that it was targeted at, apparently.
Yeah, and tax experts have widely criticized the tax's initial design for creating complex reporting requirements and harsh penalties for Canadian taxpayers who ultimately wouldn't owe any money.
So Oki went on to say that the total penalties and interest waived is remarkably high, as we observed, compared to the expected revenue.
So basically, this was a big policy misfire.
I mean, it was done with good intentions.
Well, you know what they say about good intentions, Dan.
No, what do they say?
The road to hell paved with good intentions. Do you actually not know that old saying?
Y'all know that the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Right, of course. Yeah. So apparently now the CRA is the one who's under fire for it, because the comments and Reddit and Twitter are not kind to the CRA, even though I would say this is really more of politicians trying to execute something and making everybody scramble to figure it out, including the CRA, right? Like, I would imagine they probably were not happy when they are hearing for the first time the politician saying, "Hey, we're going to put in this, underused homes tax," and they're like, "Oh, here we go," right? So I imagine they're just as much of a victim as someone. So, like, I think a lot of people want to think that they're doing something wrong here, and then people are always scared to kind of go after the CRA. But now they're being forced to walk it back, and it looks bad on them as a government agency, even though it wasn't really their idea.
Yeah, totally. You don't want to mess with the CRA, so like the IRS. You don't want to mess with those governing bodies. And I remember, Dan, you're right. When this first came out, we did like 2 episodes on the UHT because they changed the filing date a few times, and there was new information coming out, and we felt it was our responsibility to try to keep everyone informed as to what they actually had to do to comply with this.
Yeah, so the UHT was introduced with 2 main goals. Number 1, to discourage foreign owners from keeping residential properties vacant and to generate revenue for housing initiatives. However, the initial rules created unexpected complications by requiring many Canadian homeowners with properties held in trusts or partnerships to file special tax returns just to claim exemptions. Canadian corporations were also subject to these filing requirements.
So maybe we should take a little step back here and kind of re-answer some of the questions that we posed in those initial episodes, which was, why would someone even want to keep a house vacant? Like, we're real estate investors and landlords. Don't we buy real estate for rental income?
Yeah, so there are several reasons why foreign investors might intentionally keep properties vacant. I think we're looking at a different class of wealth here, probably. Like, a lot of us are buying for rental income because we want to be wealthy, whereas a lot of wealthy people maybe are buying for lack of income because they don't want to look as wealthy as they are, right?
That's a nice problem to have, I guess.
Loop the CRA back into it. Yeah, so tax sheltering could be a big one. Shelter wealth from taxation in their home countries with appreciation in Canadian real estate, or because really the return that a lot of people were buying it for in Canadian real estate over the last little bit was for buy low, sell high, and historically Canada had been pretty good at delivering on that, and a relatively safe investment vehicle. The next would be capital preservation. So some investors, particularly from countries with unstable economies or strict capital controls, or maybe, heading towards like the state seizing certain things or capital or whatever it is, they liked Canadian real estate because it protected their wealth from domestic economic or political risks in the country that they were in. The other is regulatory avoidance. So this, I think, is a big one, obviously, especially most foreign investment is in Ontario and BC. That might deter some investors from renting is fear of tenant protection laws, right? It's like, it's literally like I've had conversations with foreign investors and they were like, as somebody who isn't in Canada, isn't able to manage all of this, doesn't trust the system, or had bad experience with property managers, I would literally rather leave the house vacant.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, that's you want to talk about policy failures, but money laundering, obviously pretty big theme in Canadian real estate, kind of doesn't get talked about enough, I think, but empty homes can be used in money laundering schemes where the property itself serves as a means to clean illegally obtained funds. So you see a lot of this is in flipping, right? Paying contractors cash, etc.
And we've done full episodes on the money laundering stuff as well. Not for a while, probably, but if you dig deep into our episode catalog, you'll find stuff and we pulled some crazy stories, Dan. People walking into casinos with duffel bags, and 2 days later, it's in that duffel bag of money has turned into a mansion, and it's there empty.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of guys do it, like up in around the lakes. You see in cottage country, it like literally, like in
Like
it's
Ozark
like
style
yeah,
stuff.
it's
Yeah.
literally like that, right? Because like you
Yeah.
get a lot of local contractors, they take cash, and like that's when all the local contractors are driving $200,000 pickup trucks. Maybe there's something going on, but anyway. So these practices, I guess the last one was tax loss harvesting, which I mentioned. Some investors deliberately maintain vacant properties to generate paper losses, which can be used to offset gains in other investments for tax purposes. So, while potentially profitable for investors, obviously contribute to housing shortages, among other obvious moral issues associated with some of the other entrepreneurial activities in the list there, but and translates to affordability issues in major Canadian cities, which is why the government's put some effort into doing something about it.
For sure. I mean, every piece you just mentioned there exacerbates the problem that we already have. Right now, initially, failing to file on time triggered penalties of $5,000 per homeowner and $10,000 per corporation. Remember, usually if you are owning properties in a corp, all of this stuff, like any penalty you'll receive in a corp is going to be much higher than if you just own in your personal name. The same for any kind of landlord tenant stuff. But this, again, $5,000 for homeowner, $10,000 for corp. Ottawa later reduced these minimum fines to $1,000 for individuals and only $2,000 for corporations, and that was effective back in 2022. So kind of reeled back the consequences for missing this.
And still hit $4.5 billion worth of people not doing that. Like, I'm gonna have to do the math on that while you're speaking next. But the definition of trust and partnerships under common law added another layer of complexity to determining who needed to do a UHT return, according to this Globe and Mail article. They use an example in the article: parents who co-signed mortgages and were added to their adult children's home titles might unknowingly be considered holders of a bare trust. Similarly, couples who jointly own property often discovered that they were subject to UHT filing requirements because their joint ownership qualified as a partnership, defined as two or more people joining together in pursuit of profit. Right? Like this is, and this is, it's really just a public education issue, right? Where I do think I actually empathize for the government agencies who are basically scrambling to try and figure out, how do we tell the public all of the things that I just mentioned, all of these little nuances that I just mentioned, when the government just says, hey guys, this is what we're doing, and it's due by end of next year, right? So
and I mean, at that point, right, like when we saw this come out, parents were co-signing like crazy on mortgages for adult children. So I remember there was a bit of panic. Now, speaking of trust structures, like you just mentioned, Dan, the bare trust issue is particularly interesting as it parallels the UHT situation in terms of a policy implementation challenge. So a bare trust occurs when a trustee holds a property for a beneficiary but has no other active duties or powers or of management on that property. The trustee is essentially just a nominee holding legal title while the beneficiary has all the real rights of home ownership.
I did the math here. So 2.5 billion is like a million filings that failed to go.
Wow.
Yeah. So like, cause that's assuming $2,000. Like that's assuming the high end too. So it could be double that if half of them were the individuals, right? So according to accounting firm Doan Grant Thornton, bare trusts are commonly used to ensure privacy and anonymity of the true owner of a property. Again, we kind of returning to that idea of a privacy tax, minimize provincial land transfer tax or probate fees in transactions where beneficial ownership of a property is being transferred between multiple parties, but there's no change in the legal title, facilitate efficient property transfer in corporate reorganizations where legal ownership may need to be transferred for multiple items, gift a child or minor child or children with property who can't legally hold title, or hold legal title on a property on behalf of joint owners of a joint venture or partnership. So
right now, the government did attempt to address bare trust through reporting requirements similar to that of the UHT, but they were faced with similar challenges, right? Complex identification of what constitutes a bare trust arrangement. difficulty in enforcement and compliance monitoring, unintended impacts on legitimate family property arrangements. So kind of people caught in the crosshairs of this, right? Again, as you said, Dan, a lot of confusion. This was really a failure in educating the public. Now, the UHT, like the UHT, these initiatives highlighted the challenges of implementing broad policy changes affecting complex ownership structures without creating unintended consequences for the ordinary Canadian.
And due to widespread concerns about Canadians being unaware of their reporting obligations, the CRA made 2 interventions to waive interest penalties for those who filed late. So it was actually 3 episodes, I guess, that we had done last year, because we did the original one plus the 2 extensions about the UHT filing deadline last year.
So this wild. Is the fourth now. Wow.
Yeah.
So the agency did extend the deadline for submitting 2022 UHT returns twice. The first was from April 30th of 2023 to October 31st of 2023, and then April 30th, 2024, which aligned with the filing deadline for the 2023 tax year.
And according to a CRA spokesperson who they were able to get to provide some insight in the Globe article, the $2.5 billion figure represents interest and penalties waived for the 2022 UHT returns that were filed and paid between the initial April 30th, 2023 deadline and 2024 deadline. So April 23 to 24.
Now that total came from more than 531,000 waivers. So the average waiver was approximately 4,600. The number of waivers was also approximately 25% higher than the number of foreign nationals the government had estimated would be affected by the tax, which appeared to confirm that many Canadian taxpayers were affected as well.
So the 49 million in UHT revenues referred to the 23 and 22 tax years, according to the CRA. And the Globe also noted that responses to some questions from Conservative MP Adam Chambers, the CRA spent approximately 59 million in fiscal years 23 and 24 to implement and administer the tax, plus an additional 900,000 on advertising and promotion to raise public awareness of the measure. So a net loss, realistically, on and again, like I'm willing to say that it probably sucks just as much for the CRA to not have several years to plan, and for this to be a reactionary measure by the government to be like, hey, this is what you got to do, and it's going to cost a lot more if you got to do it instantly, right? It's like that good, fast, cheap. So maybe I'm just trying to empathize pretty hardcore with the CRA because I want them to like me. But
yeah, if anyone from the CRA is listening, we're fans of you guys. Okay, just we fly under the radar. We file everything on time. Now, this kind of flip flopping, as you were just mentioning, Dan, right? Net loss and the quick turnaround, the lack of education behind this kind of flip flopping really looks bad when you have a government, especially right down south, the United States, doing something like talking about their DOGE initiative. That is the Department of Government Efficiency. Now, I might call this inefficiency.